ship Falls of Clyde was built in Port Glasgow, Scotland in 1878 as part of a fleet of ships that transited from England to what is now India and Pakistan. When she was purchased by Captain Matson to start the Matson Navigation Fleet. She was the first Matson Navigation sailing ship. Matson sold her to a petroleum company, and in the early 1900s, when she was converted to a sailing oil tanker. There were steel tanks put inside her to carry oil.
It used to bring oil from Gaviota, California out to Hawaii. It was at 750,000 gallons, and it would last us, I don't know, in the neighborhood of 2 or 3 hours. But at the time, that was enough oil to supply Honolulu, and then it would go back with molasses in the tanks. So she's got a tremendous history here in Hawaii.
At some point in time in the 1920s, it became evident that steam was going to overtake sail. So she was sold, taken up to Alaska. Basically, she was de-rigged, similar to what she is now, and served as a fueling station for the various fleets up there. She spent decades doing that. Then she was brought down to the Seattle area, basically in sort of a derelict form. She was going to be sent up to Vancouver and made part of a harbor entrance. And that's when, mid-1960s, when folks from Hawaii became aware of what was going to be her fate. And because of the connection with Matson, with Hawaii, and the fact that she'd been in Hawaii trade, and when she was with Matson, she actually flew the Hawaiian flag. So the community was rallied to bring her back. She was towed back by the Navy into Honolulu Harbor. It's in the late 70s that they had the first restoration completed. She was all rigged and looking good.
Even though you've restored the vessel to pristine condition, it's not going to stay that way for very long. The ship did begin to go downhill. With only one person working on it, it was almost impossible to upkeep because there was so much to do. It's just a mammoth job. The Bishop Museum brought an outside expert in who declared that the ship was not seaworthy, and so the Bishop Museum decided that they were going to take it out and sink it.
The ship is a registered national landmark, so there are certain requirements that had to be done before the ship could be sunk. We were able to intervene. We were able to successfully negotiate with Bishop Museum and take over ownership of the Falls of Clyde in 2008, September 30th, 2008. During that same period of time, Bishop Museum closed the Hawaii Maritime Center to the public. All the work we've been doing down here is strictly on the ship. It's now 2011, and we were never able to get her into dry dock, at least up to this point in time. For a variety of reasons, we had to go back to square one. We did attempt to get a federal grant under the Save America's Treasures funding from the National Park Service. We were unsuccessful in doing that. That was in 2010. We had hoped that we would get a second chance at it, but with the federal debt, they have suspended funding for that program. In the last year, we have created a strategic plan. We've laid out a timeline for preserving and then restoring the ship over about the next 20-year period. The sea has been our main transportation lane from the mainland and from overseas. Falls, was trading here in Hawaii, providing service at the turn of the century and into the 20th century. So she has that connection, at least for a year, flown the Hawaiian flag. Makes her really a native sister of the state. The fact that Matson Navigation continues to be the mainstay sea trade for Hawaii, between the mainland and Hawaii. The Falls coming out of that fleet, being the originator of that fleet, I think is a very strong bond. But clearly a vintage sailing ship like the Falls fits neatly in there between the canoes at the beginning, the era of the sailing ship, and now all of the diesel-driven vessels that operate today. outside of that, the fact that for 30 years, 3 decades, the Falls was a venue for young kids to come, learn about the sea, learn about sailing, taking tours of the ships. At one time, she was a very prominent visitor attraction. The Falls was a very unique venue for parties, weddings. What we need to do is try to rekindle those memories and create the venue, create the ship.